let's go over the significance of possibly getting Kiyan Anthony. And I think first and foremost, what's important here might deviate from what you guys think. The most important thing is that he's a good player. Like straight up, he's a good player. This is not a 2-3 star recruit. You know, he's just inside the top 200. Maybe it's some recruiting services. He's like the 115th best player. There's nothing wrong with those players. You need those players. And sometimes, occasionally, they do end up breaking out and being late bloomers and looking really good, right? Not every great player in the history of college sports has been a 4 or 5 star. Having said that, Kiyan Anthony is not one of those. He is a really, really good prospect, really talented, consensus top 50 prospect, and I'm honestly putting it lightly. It's more like he's a consensus top 40. There is just one site out there, I believe it's Rivals off the top of my head, that has him at 41, so I could not say consensus top 40. I had to round up to top 50, unfortunately, but you get the idea. This is one of the better prospects in the country. It's not just Carmelo Anthony's kid and the fact that Carmelo Anthony obviously won a national championship with Syracuse, led the Orange to that title. It's not like he's just the son. This is actually a really, really good basketball player. He projects to be an elite scorer at the next level. He's got a nice jump shot. He can also still grow into his frame. And if you grow into your frame, that's certainly one way to improve. Obviously, you get stronger, you get bigger, right? We had on Sam Lance, the podcast, the other day, and he talked about how he could be a forward at the next level. So if maybe he grows an inch or two, maybe he fills out his frame a little bit more. Perhaps he can go from a 6'5" shooting guard, which is what he's listed at right now, to a 6'6" small forward, right? But it all depends on whether or not he's going to grow and fill his frame or not. But the point being is that Kiyan Anthony is a consensus top 50 prospect, and that is significant in of itself. Even if that was the only thing about him, he's a really good prospect. It's someone that we should want as Syracuse fans. Number 2 of why this is significant. Getting Kiyan Anthony could be a package deal. And by package deal, I mean it could also mean Tyler Jackson is coming to Syracuse. Now, it's not guaranteed, but we had on Sam Lance the other day who talked about it. I've put the article in the description below multiple times about Tyler Jackson. I've spoken about on the podcast and how he said him and Kiyan Anthony are talking about possibly teaming up and playing together at the next level. And that school would probably be Syracuse in all likelihood. We still have to look out for Tyler Jackson's final list of schools. It might come out today, honestly, because that's just usually my luck. I post a podcast and then, of course, it comes out, right? But we'll get to that later in the podcast. But these two grew up together in the DMV area, playing with and against each other. Also, Tyler Jackson is significant too. He's a consensus 4-star prospect. And a couple months ago, I had on Sam Kaiser, who is 24/7 High School Hoops. That's the Twitter account he runs. And he said on the podcast, this was a few months ago, so maybe you can take it with a grain of salt here, that Syracuse was the front runner for Tyler Jackson, and that if any school was going to steal him, it would be Maryland. So the thing to take away from that is essentially a 2-horse race for Tyler Jackson. If you can land Kiyan Anthony at Syracuse, I think the odds, this is just my opinion, the odds would increase that they also land Tyler Jackson. If you can land both those players on top of already having Sadiq White, assuming, of course, he stays in the 2025 class, and for now, nothing is official. I have seen the rumors out there, obviously, and we've talked about it a little on the podcast. Assuming Sadiq White stays in the class of 2025, doesn't reclassify to 2024, staying with Syracuse, don't worry. You would have Sadiq White, Kiyan Anthony, and Tyler Jackson. I would say it's safe to say that would be a top 10 recruiting class in the country for the second straight year. And they might not be done after those 3. Obviously, Acaden Lewis, they're in the top 8 for him. Who knows with Chris Senack, Asher Elson, Ryder Frost, and all those guys that they're offering. Dante Allen is someone I haven't even talked about on the podcast yet. You get Tyler, the point being, is that if you get Kiyan Anthony, you're going to get at least one player to probably follow him too, maybe even multiple players. So getting Kiyan Anthony is critical. Another thing that's significant is the fact that Syracuse is considered the favorite. And what I mean by that is it is important to cash in when you are the favorite, right? Syracuse was the front runner for Sadiq White for the most part. They really were, especially towards the end. It got to that point where most of us predicted he was going to Syracuse. That's how it is right now with Kiyan Anthony, but we're still months away from him making a decision. Syracuse, though, is considered the front runner. And when you are the front runner for a recruit, it is important to cash in, because when you're the front runner, you're spending a lot of resources to keep it that way. So it is important that Syracuse does spend the resources to keep it that way and ultimately land him as the favorite. Most of the time, when recruiting analysts say, this player I predict is going to go here, they're usually right. Have they been wrong before? Yes, they have been wrong before. No one is going to bat 1,000 here. But they get paid to typically be right. So oftentimes when they make their predictions, they're not wrong. It's important to cash in on that, right? And finally, you can't leave it out with Kiyan Anthony. He is Carmelo Anthony's son. And I just think from an optics standpoint, it is important to land him. Optics-wise, even though sons and daughters don't always follow their parents in their parents' shadows, parents' footsteps, right? Even though they don't always do the same thing or go to the same college, get into the same profession, especially in a case like this, it does feel a little bit different with Kiyan Anthony in terms of an optics standpoint. Like, you got to get him, right? He's in your backyard. He's in your backyard. You've had all these visits. You're the favorite. He's Carmelo Anthony's son who led the team to a national championship. It just feels different that they kind of have to get this kid. I remember I spoke about, who it was before even Sadiq White committed to Syracuse. I spoke about on the podcast which one I would prefer. If I had to choose between Sadiq White and Kiyan Anthony. And I said on that podcast, you can double check me on this, that Sadiq White is considered the better prospect, at least during that time. It might change. Sadiq was the better prospect, so I would want the better prospect. But from an optics standpoint, it's definitely Kiyan Anthony. Like, if Syracuse had missed out on Sadiq White before they were really, really considered the front runner, I don't think people would have batted too much of an eye over it. You miss out on Kiyan Anthony, it would just kind of sting. Obviously, if he makes a decision that's not Syracuse, I'm not going to be upset at Kiyan Anthony himself. I would be upset at the situation. I think most of us who are watching and listening to this would be the same way. Remember, they don't always follow in the same footsteps, but it would be nice if he did, right? Arch Manning, though, went to Texas. That's not Tennessee. That's not Ole Miss. Where did the dad go? I know he played for the New Orleans Saints. I forgot where he went to school, but anyways, it doesn't always happen where they follow in the presence of their father or their mother, but I just hope in this case it does work out that way. So those are the 4 significant reasons why getting Kiyan Anthony is big. Number 1, he's a really good prospect, so on that alone, that's good. You want a good prospect. It could be a package deal, right? If you get Kiyan Anthony, you're probably going to get Tyler Jackson too, and you might get more on top of that as well. Number 3, they're the favorite. You got to cash in as the favorite. And number 4, it's Carmelo Anthony's son. There is significance to that. You can't just ignore it. It is really out there. The optics-wise make it even more important to land Kiyan Anthony. So let's hope that when that decision rolls around in November, that it is positive for Syracuse.